everybody, this is Caitlin here, and welcome back to our Friday spoilers for today, our second video for today covering the spoilers for Force of Will Ancient Knights. We are getting pretty well into this set now. It's kind of bizarre how many cards we've already seen, and we still need to wait until like September time or whatever until we get a hold of these cards ourselves. But in particular, we're looking at the last ruler for Ancient Knights, and it's to do with elves here. Now, I'm going to butcher a load of these names, so apologies, I'm not very good at elvish fantasy names and whatnot, so my apologies here if I mess up some names or they sound really odd. First up, we have our ruler, our elf ruler, Fairer Leteliel. I'm gonna guess that's how you pronounce it. Looking rather dapper here in his fanciful robes here. He has a judgment of 3, which is 2 wind and 1 void. He has obviously the wind energize. And he has an ability here where we can rest 2 recovered elf resonators you control, and you can recover a target magic stone. Play this ability only once per turn. So this is quite an interesting ability here. Would I say it is better or worse than Feasting, considering that she is now our other elf ruler? I feel like just for the potential of swarming the field, Feasting might be a little bit better. Obviously, with this guy, you can recover stones, but at the same time, it means you have to rest your own elves, which, unless you're making a lot of token generation, might not be like something that's quite viable. Also depends on whether or not those elves get picked off pretty easily, because elves usually, or at least the low cost ones, don't have like the most impressive stats. So I'm not too sure about this. The one here says, Lord of the Elves and ruler beyond the portal, all Elvenkind pledge their lives to him, except the Dark Elves, which we'll find out a little bit more about when we flip over and he becomes Fairer Leteliel, the King of the Wind. He has 800 attack and 1000 defense. He's still an elf, obviously. He's got his fanciful like staff here, which I'm not too sure how this kind of curled bit at the top is like holding up this ornament, but magic exists in this world, so I guess we can just explain everything away with magic. He has an ability here. When this card enters this card enters the field with 4 gale protection counters. When this card enters the field, you can search your deck for an elf resonator with total cost 4 or less and put it into the field. Then shuffle your deck. You can remove a gale protection counter from this card. Target elf gains barrier until end of turn, or you can remove a gale force protection counter from this card. Elf gains 300 until end of turn. So, kind of interesting the mechanic here we've got here with gale counters. The only issue I have with this is that thus far, I did have a quick little kind of like rummage through the cards or whatever that we had here. None of the other cards I could see gave you any way of like producing more gale protection counters, which I'm assuming that maybe the king here is the only one that can produce them, and if that is the case, he only gets 4, which for something to be his gimmick seems a little bit not so good. I'm kind of hoping maybe later on we'll get some more spoilers. Maybe there's more cards that can produce or can like add certain counters to the elf ruler in particular, just to try and make him better, because it feels like there's not really too much point in flipping him unless you just want to search your deck and get that 4-drop elf, which you could potentially pull out Oberon, you could pull out all sorts of things, really. I feel like pulling out Oberon at that point might not be the best idea, because obviously you're not getting, unless you're not really getting anything useful other than getting 3 counters, and it's not like you can even rest those tokens anymore for his ability to recover stone. Kind of weird how he doesn't get that ability when he flips over. Also really weird how Freyla and Fairer here don't have sealed abilities, unlike Pandora that we saw previously. The bottom here it says, Gil, I told you that no dark elf may ever enter these lands. So maybe it seems like Gil has snuck some dark elves through the portal or whatnot to try and like either confront him or to like make talks or discussion or like plans of war. So maybe Gil is actually planning to betray the elves at some point here. Very interesting. He seems to be siding with the dark elves. Next up, we have the Saintly Elven Stone, a special magic stone here. We treat this card as a wind magic stone. It produces a wind, obviously, and it has another ability here where we can tap, and a target elf gains 100 until end of turn. Not the most insane of abilities. I mean, at least you're not tapping and paying something to give 100, but at the same time, it's like, if you're going to go to that much effort to, like, tap the stone to give something just 100, it feels like, you know what, it might have been better to, like, make it a little bit more, like, maybe make it, I don't know, 300 or something like that. Maybe some would argue that that's too much, but considering that it's targeting elves only, then it's kind of limiting the amount of things that you can target, so I wouldn't say it would be that broken. A stone at the centre of the elven world's power. Next up, we have an addition, which I think would actually work really well in a feasting deck. It's Portal in the Woods. It's a 2-drop 2-wind addition. When this card enters the field, you put 5 guidance counters on it. At the end of your turn, remove a guidance counter from this card. If you do, put a 100 wind elf resonator token into the field. So that would be pretty good for feasting, for generation, whatever, because obviously you wouldn't have to worry about like meeting the specific number of cards, whatever, per turn to torrent and get your different elf resonators and whatnot. So you could pretty much like stack these on top, and this would actually help really well with the Echoes of the New World Melfi, because obviously she gets buffer for each kind of wind elf resonator that enters the field and whatnot, so she can get pretty buff pretty quickly or whatever, depending on how many tokens you can get in. So this is definitely worthy of putting in the feasting deck. Don't know how well it would work with this deck in particular, because you're mainly getting the resonator tokens whatever so that you can rest them for the ruler ability. Doesn't really work too well on the J-Ruler side, so I would prefer to put this in a feasting deck rather than for the Elven King here. Next up, we have Spirit Color Elf, a 1-drop, only 100, but we've seen a lot of elves who are only 100. When this card enters the field, you put 100 wind elf resonator token into the field. Pretty simple stuff. We've seen this kind of resonator before. In the times of danger, it's always best to bring a friend. Oh, that's so cute. I also really like the artwork for this card. It's really, really pretty. It's only a common, so you can only... The max rarity you can get for this is a foil, but it's a very nice card. Kind of hope maybe they make a promo of it sometime, or whatever. They probably won't, because it's just a common, but hey, they made promos of Bear Magic, so why not? Next up, we have Commander of the Crowd, a 3-drop resonator with 3 wind for her cost. She is a 700. Obviously, she's an elf. When this card enters the field, put 2 100 wind elf resonator tokens into the field. And whenever this card attacks other elves you control, gain 100 until end of turn. So, kind of like slightly cheaper, slightly less for Oberon, because obviously Oberon is a 4-drop and he brings in 3 wind elf resonators, but at the same time his stats aren't too much better. I believe he's an 800, and this one's only 100 less attack. It's 1 mil cheaper. It's bringing in 1 less token, so depending on how much you value how many resonators you're bringing in, you might prefer Oberon, but I digress. Whenever this card attacks other elves you control, gain 100 until end of turn. So a little bit of buffing here whenever this one decides to swing in, which is really, really nice. Next up, we have quite a costly spell here. We have Farer's Command, it's actually a 7-drop. It's 3 wind and 4 void, which I suppose you probably wouldn't be getting to play very often, depending on how much ramp you've managed to get, because obviously Sacred Elves thing. So far, we've not really seen any mana ramps in Ancient Knights thus far. I'm not sure if they're just going to forgo that, where they're going to say, yeah, we're not going to make any more mana ramps, because I feel like after... we obviously had Elvish Priest back in Ground Cluster. We didn't have like a mana producer technically for wind in Elves Cluster, but obviously we got Sacred Elf and Lapis. So I'm wondering whether they're not going to print one or whatever, but I digress. Recover all resonators you control, and resonators you control gain 1000, and Pierce until end of turn. Pierce is quite a tricky keyword to get, because not a lot of resonators have it, and sometimes there's some kind of like cost or precedent for them having Pierce in the first place, because obviously I think there's like maybe 1 or 2 things in Ren, well 3 that have Pierce, but can't really remember off the top of my head. The one thing that I always remember off the top of my head that always had Pierce was Maribel from the Moonlit Savior. She was a very awesome one to have with Pierce, you know, depending on how big she could get, but really interesting. Obviously, I think this just depends on the state of your board after you've obviously swung, because you can recover everything, but depending on whether or not your opponent's blocked any of the stuff, some of it will have taken damage, so it may be hurt. But yeah, this is quite interesting. You could maybe do this, rest some of the resonators or whatever you have, I'm guessing the tokens, and to recover stones or whatever, to try and see if you can try and get all the mana or whatever for playing this card. But at the same time, you will need to like pay a lot unless you've got like some kind of ramp material or whatever. With only a word, Farrer defeated the Dark Elf Force. So I'm wondering if this is referring to the past or is it referring to the present? I'm not quite sure here, because we've got, right, it says his command or whatever, and we've also got some like these are, I'm pretty sure, 2 or maybe just 1 of his children, because we've got the prince there, but we've also got, I believe we have the princess who's the archer off to the side of it, unless this is a different artwork. But often to the right hand side there's it looks like a dark elf, because he's got like obviously the darker skin, which kind of implies the dark elves or whatever, because the dark elves that we've seen so far, they've had either kind of the darkish skin or whatever, or they've had like the kind of dark motif, whatever. So I'm not too sure whether he is a dark elf or whether he's just like a normal elf. I mean, he seems to just be a normal one, but I'm not too sure here. So I'm not quite sure whether this is referring to the past, where say the dark elves were subjugated or whatever, and like just, they were split apart, banished or whatnot, or whether this is talking about the latest battle that they've had. Maybe when Gil's brought the dark elves through the portal, whatever, the king's been like, yo, get out of my portal and whatnot. They had a big fight and he managed to push them back, so obviously the dark elves want to retaliate, maybe. Next up we have an SR, and we have Tia Letolil, Archer Princess of Elves, which is the girl I was talking about. She doesn't really look like the girl from the artwork that we saw previously too much. I thought it was maybe her. Maybe that was just like a different elf or whatever. But she seems to be the princess. I'm not quite sure whether she's the older or the younger one, but she's looking awesome. She's a 4-cost. She's 2 wind and 2 void, so you can search her out when you flip over the king. She's a 900/900 elf. When this card enters the field, you can search your deck for a card named Tia's White Falcon. Reveal it and put it into your hands, then shuffle your deck. And when this card enters the field, target resonator gains, when damage is dealt to this card, destroy it until the end of turn. So basically that's quite good for picking one of your opponent's cards, whatever, and saying, yo, if this thing is dealt damage, then you're screwed, basically. Don't worry about it. It's going to get destroyed. She also has another ability hidden down here, which is quite a costly one. I'm surprised that they even bothered to give it to her, considering how costly it is. It's 3 wind and 3 void. Tap this resonator. This card deals 1000 damage to target player. Now, this is quite a good ability, but at the same time, it's so expensive. I'm not quite sure how on earth you would ever manage to even use this ability. I can only see it if maybe you manage to keep maybe 3 or 4 sacred elves, or depending on like whether you're just committing all your stones ever to using this ability. I'm not too sure. It is a very interesting ability, but unless we have more ways to kind of ramp up will, I am not too sure how viable this is. So, I guess we'll just need to wait and see. And last but not least, we have Tia's White Falcon in particular. This is the card we were talking about. Is a 1-cost resonator, 200/200. It's a beast, not an elf. So it has flying. As long as you control Tia Letolil, Archer Princess of Elves, this card gains swiftness. So it's a flying swiftness. Very, very nice. Whenever this card attacks, it deals 200 damage to target player or resonator. So probably the best bet would be you're flying over whatever and you are dealing the 200 damage, like chip damage to the player. This probably wouldn't work too well to hit a resonator, considering that where it's a green deck, so there's probably not going to be any Demon Flames happening in here. You're probably running Mono Wind or something like that, but it's an interesting one, considering that Tia can search it out or whatever. Seems like it's got some use or whatever, but obviously it's not going to be getting any of those buffs or anything like that from all the things to do with elves, because it's just a beast. So kind of good. Not sure how many you would run if you were running Tia in the deck and whatnot. But anyway, guys, that has been the spoilers for today. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of these elves. Do you think the king here is better or worse than Feastling? Personally, I think I would prefer Feastling, but that's just because I'm a little bit biased. I'm not too sure what this king is all about. He doesn't seem to like these dark elves, which kind of upsets me because, you know, Freyla seemed really, really interesting and I quite liked her design so far, so I'm not quite sure why he's got beef with her and all this stuff. So until next time, guys, I will see you all later.